Diolch yn fawr I chi am y croeso heddiw ac am y cyfle I siarad gyda chi. As I was coming here this morning to Bill for about 10 o'clock, it reminded me that years ago we used to have to come here for 10 o'clock after milking. We had to get here to the cattle ring by 10 o'clock for the start of the judging. And as we slow down for the traffic coming just the other side of Red, even though we were part of producing the beautiful countryside, you get the chance to appreciate it. And I thought about that journey today because there are strong links between that story and the agricultural policy and the proposals, these technical legal proposals which I'm going to present to you, because there are elements in there for innovation that support things like cattle breeding, which Professor Wyn Jones would be interested in, because I think that was one of his early enthusiasms at the beginning of his professional career. Also for the vitality of rural areas, more market orientation to produce some of those billions of litres which Wyn mentioned in his introduction, and also willingness to pay to maintain the environment, which is so much appreciated by you, people who work on the land, but of course also people who don't work on the land. And I think there's a strong link in these proposals between all of that. So the outline of my presentation: first, the process of the reform, how it's been working, what are the policy changes and objectives which, as we see them, the proposals in detail, and what's next. Where are we in this discussion? Well, there's a timeline of discussion already. You've already had a chance to contribute, and many of you have personally. Your unions have contributed, the Welsh Assembly government has contributed to a public debate going back in 2010, a big conference. The Commission synthesised those ideas and put them out in November 2010, over a year ago. Since then, working with your representatives, we've looked at the impacts of those proposals and then come out with some legal proposals. So our proposals as to what the legislation would look like if it was agreed as we propose. Of course, it's a good thing it won't be produced exactly as we propose, because now these proposals go forward again to you, to the Council, the European Council of Ministers, the Agriculture Ministers, who will get a chance to pronounce on it, and also the European Parliament. And we're on that phase at the moment. And this is why the Welsh Assembly is gathering your ideas to feed into this discussion for the important decisions which will take place. Just notice I've jumped a step. One important aspect of this discussion are the budget proposals. And these are not the agricultural budget proposals, but the EU multi-annual financial framework. That's a long phrase, but it's what determines how much money is available in the European budget between 2014 and 2020. For the moment, I would say the news is good for agriculture because the amount of money is set out, and in nominal terms, in cash terms, it remains unchanged. Now, that's not decided yet. That has yet to be decided for sure, and that discussion is moving along in parallel with the agricultural discussion. Just to give you some idea of the amount of money available, this is an annual amount. It compares 2013 year with 2020. This is European money in billions of euros. So in 2013, for market measures, around 3.3 billion euros were spent. It will be slightly less, we predict, in 2020. Direct payments, more or less unchanged. That means Pillar 1, more or less unchanged. And the Pillar 2 amounts available from European money, which has to be co-funded, of course, again, more or less unchanged, giving an unchanged total. That's the amount of pot of money available, but how is it spent? What I'd like to do with this graph is to take you just a little bit back through history as to how traditionally the money's been spent and how we propose it will be spent in the future. It's rather small. It starts in 1980 on the left there. Here on my right, it's 2020. And the height of the bars, they go up to 60 billion euros. That's the annual budget, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, direct payments and rural development. And on the left-hand side, it's a bit like traffic lights to start with, at least. Red is bad, yellow is not quite so bad, but not good either. Red are export refunds, what we used to do, sending butter to Russia. Yellow is intervention storage, storing butter and skim milk powder in freezers. Then we start to see the direct payments come in, coupled payments, suckler cow premium, that's the dark blue. Those are linked to production, so to get your money you have to have the cow. And as we go further to the right, the payments become less linked to production, but more linked to other things. And our proposal is that the link should become more explicit, particularly for the environment. Now, what are the policy changes and objectives we see? Now, if we split the environment as generally into economic, environment, and social or territorial factors, we see from the economic point of view food security and demand for agricultural commodities as being a very important driver. The price variability, so prices have been high recently and it seems as if they will keep on growing and getting better, but there's a lot more variability now than there used to be. And the economic crisis which is about us at the moment, clearly that's an important driver for the budget discussion and demand for products. From the environmental point of view, that's changed over the years, but certainly climate change, greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, soil depletion in certain areas, water quality in terms of nitrates, for example, and then habitats and biodiversity. And it's really from our discussions with you and with other stakeholders that we've come up with these challenges. And from the territorial point of view, what we mean by that is maintaining vitality in rural areas, making sure there's life in rural areas, that certain areas are not, using a Brussels word, desertified, that people are still farming in most areas, and to have a diversity in agriculture so that agriculture is maintained in all areas of the EU in some shape or form and not just concentrated in the most fertile areas. Just a reminder of the prices of agricultural commodities, which are certainly growing but variable. We have to deal with that, and of course we understand that prices are increasing, but those have been strongly linked to the price of other commodities like fuel and fertilizer, which have also gone up in price, which means that high prices are not always good news because they're often associated with high costs. So taking these drivers, economic, environmental and territorial drivers, we want a viable food production, sustainable management of natural resources and action on climate, and this balanced territorial development that we discussed, farming not only in the fertile areas but also in less fertile areas. And the idea is to have greater competitiveness, improved sustainability and the greater effectiveness of the policy. In detail, and I'll run through this quite quickly, this detail, but I know Terry is going to come up on that later. You probably know from the recent discussions what is proposed in detail. A compulsory scheme, a basic payment scheme, then as a pyramid, if you like, a green payment and a possible young farmer scheme, and then voluntary choice for the member state, some coupled support for production which wouldn't take place otherwise, and support in natural constraint areas. Cross-compliance would apply to everything, and all farmers would have access to a farm advisory scheme such as we're benefiting from today. And then for small farmers, there's also a simplified scheme. So this comes into, well, here I present it as a block, a basic payment scheme at the bottom of the chart, national or regional flat rate per eligible hectare. I'm sure you will be discussing that later. Regions and criteria to be chosen by the member state. Some definition of agricultural activity, so you should be working the land in our idea. Difficult to define, I know, but you should be working the land to benefit from the payment, and the definition of the active farmer is the same way. An important green payment. To qualify for this payment, some kind of greening activity is necessary. Examples here, crop diversification, permanent grassland, is it sufficient or not to continue the move towards greening? Ecological focus area, 30% of the envelope. And then, as I was saying, the young farmer scheme, up to 2% of the direct payments envelope, and the criteria for that. And then built on top is this coupled support, which is now possible in a much wider range of sectors. Can be as much as 5 or 10% of all of the envelope of direct payments. So of course it's not extra money, it's coming from somewhere else within the Wales envelope, if you like, in this context. And finally, some support where natural constraints are particularly significant. And on the side of that, a small farmer scheme for those who choose to go down that route. There's also a big discussion on the redistribution of direct payments. So, as you're aware, there's a certain redistribution proposed between member states, as it might be also the case on a more local level. And for the moment, what is proposed is that countries should move closer to the European average. For the moment, it's if a country is far from, well, the distance between a member state and 90% of the average will be closed by 1/3. That's what's proposed. And the blue bars are what is distributed for the moment by member state per hectare in this particular case. And the orange line is where the new situation would be. It's, I would say, not such a big deal for the UK, because the UK is relatively close in payments per hectare to the EU average, so the loss of the gain isn't particularly significant. But there's a bit out there in the rest of Europe, there's a big redistribution debate taking place clearly. Now, we talked about the direct payments. In terms of the market side, prices are supposed to be strong, but they're going to be variable. So there's an enhanced safety net, starting at the bottom of this chart. There's a reserve for crisis to intervene, whether it's poultry crisis as we had a few years ago, or cucumbers, which we had a couple of years ago, or in fact, you know, crises which are more significant than that, which have taken place in the consumer's perception of food. There is a crisis reserve for these types of crises which can take place. But the same thing, much stronger market orientation, more subsidized consumption schemes are going out, and help to make the market function better without intervention. And here we have in mind greater participation of producer organizations, so that farmers and producers can get together legally to create a force which can contend with the buying power further downstream in the food production chain. And then opportunities also for inter-branch organizations in the production chain, so that there's also a cooperation which takes place along the chain in terms of information about prices and quality and what sort of demand is going to be like. And also, finally, there is some sustainable consumption for school fruit and the school milk scheme. These two schemes are maintained. Moving to rural development, I think there's much more opportunity in rural development, I would say, to do what you want to do locally. But it's linked to the EU 2020 strategy, which is for growth, for green growth, for inclusive growth, sustainable growth. This comes down through all of the structural policies that we have. There's the EAFRD, which is the pillar 2, if you like, on the left-hand side, rural development. But we have other policies which are administered here in Wales, even Cohesion Fund, the ERDF. And the idea is it fosters knowledge transfer, enhancing competitiveness of all types of agricultural activity, restoring, preserving and enhancing ecosystems, addressing climate change issues, and supporting innovation and supporting the efficient use of resources. So the last thing I want to mention, it's something I know that the administration has problems with, and you have problems with, about the agricultural policy. It's not very straightforward, and the closer you get to the ground, often the more complicated it becomes to fill up the forms and comply to all the rules. But there is an effort made to try to simplify that. Whether we're always successful, I'm not really too sure, but a sincere effort is made to keep this as simple as possible. So for 30% of all claimants, there's a small farm scheme. Maybe you don't qualify for that, many of you here. So greening should be kept as simple as possible, including only measures that have an environmental impact and are manageable, controllable without a major cost. That's the idea. The payments for the administration, you should deal with one paying agency. And in rural development, the way of being reimbursed should be simplified. As regards the controls, which of course will continue, these control systems should be made lighter, or certainly we hope so, so if there are low error rates made by the member state or made by the beneficiaries, then the follow-up checks will be less, and we in Brussels, when we make our audit evaluation, when we plan our audit plans for next year, we take into account those member states which have a good record and can show that they have a good record. So an effort to reward, if you like, a good behavior. So what we hope will happen: enhanced competitiveness, improved sustainability and greater effectiveness. The competitiveness, the producing more milk, if you like, through innovation, knowledge transfer, risk management and cooperation in the food supply chain. The sustainability from green payments, enhanced cross-compliance and using resources again more efficiently. And finally, the effectiveness of the policy. We hope the targeting will be improved, better redistribution, more apt distribution, and this link of the Rural Development Fund to the strategic framework for structural funds. Next slide, please. It's a consultation still. We're further down the road, as I showed you at the beginning. Now the inputs will be perhaps more from the ministers and the European Parliament, but we're still listening to yourselves, to the farming unions. We still receive people, there are familiar faces here, and we'll continue to do so, and this debate is not over for a while yet. Thank you very much for your attention.